When a black man rushing to work witnesses a child about to be kidnapped, he risks everything to stop two criminals in their tracks. What he doesn't realize is that his selfless act of courage will not only save the boy's life, but also set into motion events that will completely transform his own future in ways he never thought possible. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're reading from. And if you're inspired by stories of bravery and hope, be sure to like and follow for more. Marcus Hale walked briskly down the cracked sidewalk, his steel-toed boots scuffing the pavement. A faded gray backpack hung off one shoulder, slapping lightly against his back with every hurried step. The streets were unusually quiet for a Monday morning, the only sound the distant rumble of a garbage truck and the occasional chirp of a bird overhead. He checked his watch and grimaced. 7:52 a.m. He was already pushing it. The morning shift at Harbor Logistics Warehouse started at 8 sharp, and Henry Rollins, his boss, didn't tolerate late arrivals. He had already been chewed out twice this month. Another infraction would come out of his paycheck, and Marcus couldn't afford that, not with Amara's mounting medical bills. He sped up, turning a corner, when a faint sound stopped him in his tracks. At first it was almost indistinct, just a rustling, like wind brushing against loose paper. But then it came again, louder this time. A muffled cry. Marcus froze, ears straining. There it was, a boy's voice, high-pitched and desperate. "Let me go! Please, let me go!" The sound was coming from an alley up ahead. His heart kicked into overdrive, hammering against his ribs. "No, keep walking, Marcus, just keep walking." He took a step forward, ignoring the rising panic clawing at his chest. Whatever was happening in that alley wasn't his problem. He was late. He couldn't afford to be late. But then the cry came again, sharper, frantic. "Help! Somebody help!" Marcus swore under his breath and skidded to a halt. His conscience screamed at him louder than his fear. Taking a shaky breath, he turned toward the alley. The sight hit him like a punch to the gut. Two men, both burly, dressed in dark clothes and reeking of trouble, were dragging a small boy toward a black van parked at the alley's far end. The kid couldn't have been older than 7 or 8, his blond hair a mess, his face streaked with tears as he thrashed against their iron grips. "Let me go!" the boy shrieked again, his little legs kicking furiously. Marcus glanced down the street. Deserted. No cars, no pedestrians, no one to call for help. It was just him. "Damn it," he muttered. His eyes darted around, searching for anything he could use. His gaze landed on a discarded wooden plank, leaning against a dumpster nearby. Without hesitation, he grabbed it. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the alley walls. The men stopped, their heads snapping toward him in unison. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus demanded, stepping forward with the plank gripped tightly in his hand. One of the men, taller than the other and with a jagged scar across his cheek, sneered. "Mind your business, pal. Walk away." Marcus didn't budge. "You let the boy go. Now." His voice was steady, but his heart was racing. The shorter man, stockier and with a shaved head, smirked. "What are you going to do? Take both of us on with that stick? Get lost." Marcus tightened his grip on the plank, his knuckles whitening. "You want to find out?" For a split second, the two men exchanged a glance. Then, without warning, Marcus let out a yell and charged. "Hey!" he bellowed, loud enough to carry beyond the alley. He raised the plank, swinging it once against the metal dumpster as he ran. The sharp clang echoed like a gunshot. The reaction was immediate. The taller man cursed under his breath, glancing nervously toward the street. The shorter one let go of the boy's arm, shoving him roughly aside. "Let's go," the tall one barked. "But now." They bolted, running toward the back of the alley and disappearing down a side street. The black van screeched to life seconds later and sped off, its tires squealing against the asphalt. Marcus stood there, breathing heavily, the plank still raised. His gaze darted between the boy and the alley's darkened exit. When he was sure the men weren't coming back, he tossed the plank aside and crouched down. The boy was huddled against the wall, trembling and clutching his knees to his chest. Marcus softened his tone. "Hey, kid, you're okay now. They're gone." The boy looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. His bottom lip quivered, but he didn't say a word. Marcus knelt in front of him, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "My name's Marcus. What's yours?" "Timmy?" the boy stammered, his voice barely audible. "Timmy?" Marcus repeated gently. "That's a good name. Listen, Timmy, you're safe now, okay? I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." Timmy sniffled and nodded, though his little hands still trembled. Marcus glanced toward the street again. He needed to get the boy somewhere safe. He didn't know where Timmy's parents were, or if the men might return. Leaving him here wasn't an option. "Where's home, kid? Do you know your address?" Marcus asked. Timmy shook his head, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. I don't know. I just want to go home." Okay, Marcus said quickly. "It's okay, we'll figure it out. The police can help." The mention of police seemed to calm Timmy slightly, his sobs slowing to quiet sniffles. Marcus stood and held out his hand. "Come on, let's go. I'll take you to them." Timmy hesitated for a moment before slipping his small hand into Marcus. "All right," Marcus said softly. He led the boy out of the alley and onto the street, keeping an eye out for anyone suspicious. As they walked toward the nearest police station, Marcus glanced at his watch again. He was late. Beyond late. His boss would chew him out for this, maybe even dock his pay. But as he glanced down at Timmy, still gripping his hand tightly, he knew one thing for certain. He'd made the right choice. The cool air of the police station hit Marcus and Timothy as they stepped inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over the room. A few officers milled about, paperwork in hand, while others spoke quietly into radios. Marcus tightened his grip on Timothy's hand, offering the boy a small nod of reassurance. "Hey, I need some help here," Marcus called out, his voice cut through the hum of activity. A uniformed officer behind the desk, a middle-aged man with graying hair, looked up and walked over. "What's going on?" the officer asked, glancing at the tear-streaked boy clinging to Marcus. "This boy, Timothy, I found him," Marcus began, his words coming quickly, though his tone remained steady. "Two men were trying to drag him into a van in an alley. I scared them off, but the kid's still shaken up. He doesn't know where he lives, and I didn't know what else to do, so I brought him here." The officer's expression immediately turned serious. "You said two men, trying to take him into a van?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I can describe them. Big guys. One was taller, had a scar on his cheek. The other was shorter, stocky, shaved head. They drove off in a black van. No plates on it that I could see." The officer grabbed a notepad from his pocket and scribbled furiously. "All right, let me get someone to take this down properly. Just give me a second." He stepped away, motioning to another officer, a younger woman in her early 30s, who quickly approached. "Officer Green," she introduced herself, her tone professional but warm, as she crouched down to Timothy's level. "Hi there, buddy. My name's Officer Green. You're safe now, okay? No one's going to hurt you." Timothy nodded but didn't speak, his small hand still clutching Marcus's tightly. Green gave him a kind smile before standing and addressing Marcus. "Let's get this on record. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Marcus repeated the events in detail, the alley, the two men, Timothy's cries for help, and how they fled when he charged at them. He described the kidnappers as best as he could remember, though his words were interrupted occasionally by a hesitant glance at Timothy, who remained glued to his side. "They didn't say much to me," Marcus finished, "but the whole thing felt planned. They had the van ready, doors open, they were moving fast." Green jotted down every word. "We'll put out an alert. We've had reports of similar incidents, but this is the first where someone intervened. You may have saved this boy's life." Marcus shifted uncomfortably at the praise. "I just couldn't leave him there," he muttered. Green's gaze softened. "Well, Not everyone would have done what you did. It takes guts. You did a good thing." Timothy whimpered softly, his voice barely audible. "I just want to go home." Green crouched back down. "We're going to make sure you do, okay? We're going to call your mom and dad, and they'll come get you." Marcus looked down at Timothy. "See, kid? You're in good hands now." Timothy finally let go of Marcus's hand and allowed Green to gently lead him to a chair near the desk. He sat with his knees pulled up to his chest, his small frame trembling slightly, as Green knelt beside him, speaking to him in soft, soothing tones. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The tension in his chest began to ease, replaced by a subtle but growing sense of relief. Timothy was safe. Another officer approached Marcus, a broad-shouldered man with a clipboard. "We'll need your contact information in case we have any follow-up questions." "Of course," Marcus said, quickly reciting his name, phone number, and address. The officer thanked him and added, "Don't worry, we'll take it from here." Marcus nodded, though his mind was already drifting. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:17. His stomach dropped. Late. He was officially late. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, rubbing a hand over his face. Green caught his expression as she walked back over. "You okay?" Marcus offered a half smile. "Yeah, just work." Her brow furrowed. "You're late because you brought him here?" "Yeah, but it's fine," Marcus replied quickly, waving it off. "Not like I had much of a choice." "Well, for what it's worth, I'd say you made the right call," Green said firmly. "I'll bet his parents will think so too." Marcus allowed himself a small chuckle. "Guess I'll find out when I get my paycheck." Green smiled, but the weight of the situation wasn't lost on her. "You sure you don't need anything? Coffee? Water?" "No, I'm good," Marcus replied. He glanced back at Timothy, who now seemed calmer, Green's kind presence reassuring him. "All right," Green said, turning to Timothy. "Let's call your parents, okay? I bet they're worried sick." As she picked up the phone, Marcus turned toward the door. His time here was done, and the rest would be handled by the police. He gave Timothy one last look, offering him a quiet nod. The boy blinked at him, then raised a small hand in a shy wave. Marcus smiled faintly and waved back before stepping outside into the cold morning air. Marcus pushed through the warehouse doors, his heavy boots thudding against the concrete floor. The air inside was thick with the smell of oil and cardboard, the hum of forklifts echoing off the high metal ceilings. A quick glance at the clock above the break room made his stomach twist. 9:04 a.m. He was exactly an hour and 4 minutes late. "Damn it," he muttered, swiping a hand down his face. His shift had technically started at 8, and Henry Rollins, the warehouse manager, wasn't exactly known for his forgiving nature. Before we continue, please give this video a like if you believe Marcus's brave decision to intervene and save Timothy was the right thing to do, even at the cost of being late to work. And let us know in the comments, would you have made the same choice? Will the police bring the kidnappers to justice? Stick around to see how the story unfolds. Marcus headed straight to the time clock, scanning his badge with a faint beep. As he turned toward the loading docks, he didn't even make it halfway before hearing the familiar bark of his boss. "Hail!" Marcus winced. The voice was sharp, carrying an edge of irritation he'd expected, but still dreaded. He turned to see Henry Rollins striding toward him, clipboard in hand, and his brow furrowed in what seemed like permanent disapproval. "You're an hour late," Rollins snapped, stopping in front of Marcus. He gestured toward the clock with his clipboard like it was some kind of sacred artifact. "Do you know what time we start around here?" "Yes, sir," Marcus said, keeping his tone as even as he could. 8 sharp, not 9, not 8:01. 8, you know this." "I know," Marcus replied, meeting his boss's gaze. "But—" "No buts," Rollins interrupted, jabbing the clipboard toward him. "Rules are rules. We don't make exceptions because someone decides to roll in late. That hour's coming out of your paycheck, Hale." You know the drill." Marcus clenched his jaw but didn't argue. "I understand, but if you'll just let me explain—" Rollins folded his arms, one eyebrow raised. "Oh, I can't wait to hear this." "I was late because I had to take a kid to the police station," Marcus said, keeping his tone steady, though irritation was building under the surface. "I saw him getting grabbed by two men, looked like they were trying to kidnap him. I couldn't just walk away. I had to stop them." For a moment, Rollins just stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a short, humorless laugh. "So what? You're a superhero now? Running around saving kids instead of showing up for your job?" Marcus stiffened. "I didn't do it for attention, Mr. Rollins. The boy needed help, and there was no one else around." "Uh-huh," Rollins said, waving a hand dismissively. "And you didn't think to call someone else, like, oh, I don't know, the police? Instead of playing hero and making yourself late?" Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. "There wasn't time to call anyone. I had to act fast. Look, I know I'm late and I know the rules, but what was I supposed to do? Leave the kid there?" Rollins scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "What you were supposed to do is show up to work on time, like everyone else here. You think those pallets over there are going to load themselves?" He gestured toward a stack of boxes waiting by the dock. Marcus took a slow breath. "I'm just asking for a little understanding here. It's not like I was sitting at home watching TV." "Understanding?" Rollins said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You want understanding? Let me give you a little perspective, Hale. I've got a warehouse full of guys who managed to show up on time this morning without any superhero side quests. You think I'm going to cut you a break because you've got some story about a kid? Come on." Marcus bit back the sharp retort forming on his tongue. Instead, he let out a slow exhale and nodded. "All right. I get it." "Good," Rollins said curtly. "Now, get to work. You're already an hour behind and we've got shipments going out by noon." Without another word, Rollins turned and walked off, leaving Marcus standing there. For a moment, Marcus stayed rooted in place, staring after him. His shoulders were tense, his chest tight with frustration. He muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he made his way toward the pallets Rollins had pointed out. The loading dock was already a flurry of activity, with forklifts zipping back and forth and workers shouting instructions to one another. Marcus grabbed a pair of gloves from his back pocket and slipped them on, focusing on the task at hand. As he began lifting boxes onto a conveyor belt, his mind drifted back to Timothy. The boy's tear-streaked face, his trembling hands clutching Marcus's, it was still fresh in his memory. He could hear the boy's voice, shaky but desperate. "I just want to go home." The image of Timothy's frightened eyes pushed back against the frustration boiling inside him. He could still feel the sting of Rollins' words, the dismissiveness of it all. But deep down, he knew he'd made the right choice. Marcus straightened up and wiped his forehead with the back of his glove. He couldn't dwell on it. There was no point. Rollins wouldn't change his mind, and the money wasn't coming back. But Timothy was safe. That mattered more than a few bucks. As the morning wore on, Marcus worked in silence, lifting, stacking, and sorting without complaint. His body moved automatically, the rhythm of the job familiar after years of repetition. The sterile air of the police station buzzed with quiet tension as Officer Green picked up the phone to call Timothy's parents. Marcus had already left for work, leaving Timothy in the care of the officers, but the boy's tear-streaked face and fragile, whispered words still lingered in the room like ghosts. Green dialed the number on file, glancing over at Timothy, who sat curled in a chair, his knees tucked under his chin. The phone rang twice before a man's voice, tense and clipped, answered. "This is Matthew Parker," he said. "Mr. Parker, this is Officer Green with the precinct. We found your son, Timothy." For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then the words came, stumbling out like they couldn't keep pace with the relief behind them. You found him? He's safe? Where is he?" "Yes, sir. He's safe and here with us at the station. We'd like you to come down as soon as possible." "We're on our way," Matthew said. his voice breaking slightly. "Thank you." In the Parker home, the next 10 minutes were a blur. Matthew hung up the phone and called out to his wife Laura, who was sitting on the living room couch, clutching Timothy's stuffed dinosaur to her chest. She shot up at the sound of his voice, the words, "They found him," unlocking a flood of tears. They were out the door in seconds, climbing into their sleek black SUV, and speeding toward the station. Laura gripped the dashboard with one hand, the other covering her mouth as she whispered prayers under her breath. "Please let him be okay," she murmured. "He's okay," Matthew said firmly, though his own voice wavered. "They said he's safe." When they arrived at the station, Laura didn't wait for Matthew to park. She was out of the car almost before it stopped, sprinting up the steps and through the double doors. Her eyes scanned the room desperately until they landed on Timothy, who was sitting near Officer Green. "Timmy!" she cried, rushing forward. Timothy's head snapped up at the sound of her voice. "Mommy!" The boy leapt from the chair and ran toward her, colliding into her arms. She sank to her knees, holding him tightly as tears streamed down her face. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry," Laura sobbed, rocking him back and forth. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there." Matthew joined them moments later, dropping to one knee and pulling them both into an embrace. His throat was tight, his arms trembling as he held his son. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You're safe." Timothy clung to them, his small frame trembling as he buried his face in Laura's shoulder. "I was so scared," he mumbled. "I know, baby," Laura said, stroking his hair. "It's okay now. You're okay." After a few minutes, Officer Green stepped forward, giving the family a moment to collect themselves. "I'm so glad you're all reunited," she said with a gentle smile. "Timothy's had a rough morning, but he's been very brave." Matthew stood, wiping his face quickly and trying to regain his composure. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you so much for calling us." "It's my job, Mr. Parker," Green replied. "But the real credit goes to the man who brought Timothy in. He's the one who stopped the abduction." Matthew's brow furrowed. "Stopped it? What do you mean?" Laura's breath hitched. Was he hurt? Did something happen? Green shook her head. "No, he's fine. He saw two men trying to take Timothy and intervened. He chased them off and brought Timothy here." Matthew turned to Timothy, crouching in front of him. "Timmy, is that true? A man saved you?" Timothy nodded, his grip on Laura's hand tightening. "He had a stick," he said softly. "He scared the bad men away." Laura let out a shaky breath, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, my God." "Do you know this man?" Matthew asked Green, his tone urgent. Green nodded. "His name is Marcus Hale. He works at a warehouse downtown, Harbor Logistics, I believe. He gave us his information in case we needed to follow up." Matthew's jaw tightened, determination flickering in his eyes. "I need to thank him for what he did." Laura looked at her husband, her face still streaked with tears. "Yes, we both do, if it weren't for him." She trailed off, shaking her head. Green handed Matthew a piece of paper with Marcus's name and workplace written on it. "He didn't ask for anything, Mr. Parker. Just brought Timothy here and left. But I'm sure he'll appreciate hearing from you." Matthew stared at the paper for a moment before folding it neatly and tucking it into his pocket. As they drove home, Timothy curled up in the back seat, finally drifting off to sleep, his small fingers still clutching Laura's hand. "Matthew," Laura said quietly, her voice tinged with guilt. "How could I let this happen? I turned around for 1 second and he was gone. I should have—" "Don't do that," Matthew interrupted gently. "This isn't your fault, Laura." Her eyes brimmed with fresh tears. "But it feels like it is." Matthew reached over, placing his hand over hers on the armrest. "What matters is he's safe now." In the rearview mirror, he glanced at Timothy, peaceful in sleep for the first time that day. The image of the boy's terror from earlier still lingered in Matthew's mind, but it was joined now by something else. Gratitude. Gratitude for the stranger who had stepped in when no one else was there. After his shift had ended, heads straight to the hospital. The hospital room was quiet except for the faint hum of machines and the occasional beep of a monitor. Marcus stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him, his footsteps muted on the linoleum floor. Amara's small frame was propped up against a pile of pillows, her skin pale against the vibrant pink blanket she insisted on using, no matter how scratchy it was. Her wide brown eyes lit up when she saw him, and the smile that broke across her face was as bright as the sun, despite the IV line taped to her arm. "Daddy," she exclaimed, her voice thin but full of joy. Marcus's exhaustion melted away for a moment, replaced by the warmth only his daughter could bring him. "Hey, Peanut," he said, crossing the room and leaning down to kiss her forehead. "How's my girl doing today?" "I'm okay," she replied with a shrug, though her small shoulders didn't rise far. "The nurse said I might get a new medicine soon. She said it's supposed to make me feel better, but I told her I feel fine already." Marcus chuckled softly, pulling up the chair beside her bed. "You've got everyone here fooled, huh?" Amara grinned, her tiny teeth peeking through. "Maybe a little, but I don't want them to worry." He leaned back, studying her closely. Amara had always been like this, stronger than anyone had a right to be at her age. Even now, with the machines keeping a constant watch over her fragile body, she refused to let her spirits dip. But Marcus could see the toll it was taking on her, in the hollows of her cheeks, the way her hands seemed smaller each time he held them. "You're a tough one, you know that?" he said. "Of course. I get it from you," Amara replied matter-of-factly, flashing him a mischievous smile that reminded him so much of her mother. His heart twisted, but he kept his face steady. "You sure do," he said softly, reaching out to smooth down the curls on her head. "What about you?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "How was your day? Did you move a lot of boxes again?" Marcus paused, the events of the morning flashing through his mind. He could still see Timothy's face, hear his cries, feel the weight of the boy's small hand gripping his own. A part of him wondered if Amara was too young to hear about what happened, but he could never bring himself to hide things from her. She had a way of making even the heaviest stories feel lighter. "Well," he began, leaning forward conspiratorially, "today was different. I didn't just move boxes, I saved a little boy." Amara's eyes widened in excitement. "You saved someone?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, he was in trouble, and I couldn't just walk away. 2 bad guys were trying to take him, but I scared them off." Her mouth fell open in awe, and she clapped her hands together. "You're a hero, Daddy." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't know about that. I just did what anyone would have done." "No way," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "Not everyone would do that. Some people are too scared. But you weren't scared. You're a real hero." Marcus couldn't help but smile at her determination. "Well, if my Peanut says I'm a hero, then I guess I'll believe her." Amara nodded firmly, her grin returning. "Did the little boy say thank you?" "He did," Marcus said. "He was really scared, though. I took him to the police, and they called his parents. I think they were pretty happy to have him back." "I bet they were," Amara said softly. She fidgeted with the edge of her blanket, her expression growing more thoughtful. "If something bad ever happened to me, you'd save me too, right?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently between his own. "Amara, nothing bad is ever going to happen to you while I'm around. I'll always be there for you. Always." She looked up at him, her trust in him as unwavering as ever. "I know, Daddy. That's why you're my hero." The words hit him harder than they should have. He gave her a soft smile, his thumb brushing over the back of her hand. "You're the real hero, Peanut. You're the strongest person I know." Amara beamed, but her eyes betrayed her weariness. Marcus could see it in the way her eyelids drooped slightly, the way she shifted every few minutes, trying to get comfortable. She tried so hard to keep up the illusion of being fine, but Marcus knew better. He sat back, letting out a quiet sigh as he glanced around the room. The machines, the medicines, the bills. God, the bills. They seemed to multiply every time he blinked. His paycheck from the warehouse barely covered their rent and food, let alone the hospital costs. No matter how much overtime he worked, it never felt like enough. And yet, he couldn't let her see his worry. He couldn't let her feel the weight of the burden he carried. "You know," he said after a moment, forcing a lighter tone, "once you get out of here, we're going straight to the park, just like we used to. Swings, slides, ice cream, whatever you want." Amara's eyes lit up. "Promise?" Marcus leaned forward, and Pinky swore, their fingers locking together in a ritual they'd shared since she was a toddler. "Promise. Every day if you want." "Okay," she said, her smile growing soft. "I can't wait." But as Marcus sat back, watching her settle into her pillows, his mind wandered. She had no idea how far from better she really was, or how close he was to running out of options. He swallowed hard and smiled at her again, because that's what she needed from him. Strength, hope, certainty. Even if he had none of those left for himself. "I love you, Peanut," he said softly. "Love you too, Daddy," Amara replied, her voice already fading as her eyes began to close. Marcus stayed by her side, holding her hand long after she drifted off to sleep. The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the faded curtains in Marcus's small living room. He sat at the rickety kitchen table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug and reviewing his schedule for the week on a crumpled notepad. Bills were piled neatly beside it, an ever-present reminder of the financial mountain he couldn't seem to climb. Amara's treatment was top priority, but every time he did the math, the numbers refused to work in his favor. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He frowned, glancing at the clock on the wall. 10:22 a.m. It was too early for visitors, and no one he knew drove anything close to the sleek black SUV he could see idling outside through the thin curtains. Marcus froze, his hand tightening around the mug. His first thought was the kidnappers. The men who tried to take Timothy, had they come back to track him down? Maybe they'd seen him bring the boy to the station. Maybe they wanted revenge. His heart hammered in his chest as he stood slowly, scanning the room for something to use as a weapon. His eyes landed on a wooden bat leaning against the wall by the door. He grabbed it, inhaling deeply to calm himself. Another knock, louder this time. "Mr. Hale?" a man's voice called, calm and measured. "Are you home? My name is Matthew Parker. My wife and I would like to speak with you." Marcus paused, his grip on the stick loosening. Parker. That name sounded familiar. Timothy's last name. He took another cautious step toward the door, peeking through the peephole. Standing outside were a man in his early 40s, dressed casually in a polo shirt and jeans, and a woman with a kind face, wearing a soft cardigan. Both looked more anxious than threatening. Marcus exhaled, setting the stick aside, but still wary as he unlocked the door. He cracked it open, his gaze shifting between them. "Can I help you?" Matthew stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Hale? I'm Matthew Parker, and this is my wife, Laura. We're Timothy's parents." At the mention of Timothy, Marcus relaxed, opening the door wider. "Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I thought, well, it doesn't matter. Come on in." The couple stepped inside hesitantly, their eyes darting around the small, dimly lit space. The couch was old and sagging, and the wallpaper was peeling in a few spots, but everything was clean and tidy. Marcus scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. Sorry about the place," he said. "It's not much." "It's fine," Laura said quickly, her tone genuine. "We're not here to judge. We just wanted to thank you in person." Matthew nodded, his expression earnest. "We heard what you did for Timothy." Marcus shrugged uncomfortably, gesturing toward the couch. "Please have a seat." The couple sat down, though Laura barely seemed able to stay still. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Timothy told us what happened," she began, her voice trembling. "He told us about the men, how scared he was, and how you saved him. I can't even imagine what could have happened if you hadn't been there." "He's safe now. That's what matters," Marcus said gently, sitting across from them. Laura let out a shaky breath, wiping at her eyes. "He's our only child," she said, her voice breaking. "He means everything to us. We can never repay you for what you've done." Matthew placed a steady hand on her shoulder, giving her a comforting squeeze before turning back to Marcus. Marcus nodded slowly, the weight of their gratitude sinking in. "I get it," he said quietly. "I've got a daughter. I'd do anything for her, too." Matthew tilted his head slightly, his expression curious. "Your daughter? Is she here?" Marcus hesitated, glancing toward a photo on the wall. Amara, smiling wide in a bright yellow dress. "No," he said finally. "She's in the hospital. She's been there for a while now. Leukemia." Laura's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she whispered. It is what it is," Marcus said, his voice steady but heavy. "She's tough, though, stronger than me most days. But it's been hard. The bills, the treatments, they don't stop coming." Matthew leaned forward, his brows furrowed in concern. "And you're handling this all on your own?" "Yeah," Marcus said with a small shrug. "Her mom left when things got tough. It's just me and Amara now." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Laura wiped at her eyes again, her voice soft. "You must be an incredible father. She's lucky to have you." Marcus looked down, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "She's my whole world." Matthew straightened, his expression resolute. "Mr. Hale, Marcus, please let us help you. Whatever you need for your daughter's treatment, consider it done." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "I appreciate that, but I can't—" "Please," Matthew interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "You saved my son. Let me help your daughter. This isn't charity. It's one father helping another." Marcus hesitated, the offer both tempting and overwhelming. But when he thought of Amara, her frail body and bright eyes, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Thank you. For her sake, thank you." The Parkers smiled, relief washing over their faces, and in that moment a connection was forged between them, not just gratitude, but an unspoken bond of shared humanity. Matthew smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Good. And I've got another idea, one that might help you just as much as it helps her." "Where are you working right now?" Marcus let out a small sigh. "Warehouse. 'Tis enough to keep the lights on." Matthew nodded, as though confirming something to himself. "I think I can help with that. We have an opening at Parker Global. Better pay, better hours. What do you think?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Let's talk about it." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck, glancing between Matthew and Laura, still trying to wrap his head around what Matthew had just offered. A job. A real job, with better pay, more predictable hours, and most importantly, the chance to spend more time with Amara. "You're serious about this?" Marcus asked, his voice low, almost disbelieving. Matthew nodded, leaning forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. "Dead serious. I own a logistics company, Parker Global Enterprises. I've got an opening in our operations department. It's nothing flashy, but it's honest work, and it pays better than what you're making now. Plus, the hours are a lot more flexible. You'll be able to spend more time with your daughter." For a moment, Marcus could only stare at him. He wasn't used to people offering him a lifeline. The world he lived in didn't work that way. Most people barely acknowledged him, let alone extended a hand to help. I don't know," Marcus said slowly. "It sounds too good to be true." "It's not," Matthew said firmly. "You're clearly a hard-working guy, and you've got the kind of grit I admire. I need people like that on my team. This is a job, Marcus, not a handout. Laura chimed in, her voice soft but encouraging. And think of what it could mean for Amara. More time with her, less stress for you. You deserve this, Marcus. Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. The idea of walking away from the warehouse, from the grueling shifts and the constant worry about being late, was tempting. But there was a part of him that felt uneasy. Could he really trust this man he'd just met? Was it fair to take a job that he hadn't earned the traditional way? I don't know, he said again, his voice tinged with doubt. What if I'm not cut out for it? I didn't go to college or anything. I've been lifting boxes my whole life. I don't know logistics or any of that. Matthew smiled, a calm reassurance in his tone. Marcus, we're not looking for someone with a fancy degree. We're looking for someone who's dependable, someone who can lead by example. You've already proven you can handle pressure. What you did for Timothy proves that. And if you're worried about the technical stuff, we'll train you. I'll make sure you've got everything you need to succeed. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the photo of Amara on the wall. Her smile stared back at him, a silent reminder of why he worked so hard every day. If this job meant better pay, more time with her, and the chance to finally breathe, maybe he owed it to her to take a chance. Finally, he looked back at Matthew. All right, he said, his voice steady now. I'll do it. I'll take the job. Matthew grinned, extending his hand. You won't regret it. Marcus shook it, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders for the first time in what felt like years. The following afternoon, Matthew and Laura accompanied Marcus to the hospital to visit Amara. As they walked into her room, Amara's eyes widened at the sight of the two strangers standing beside her father. "Daddy, who are they?" she asked, her voice curious but a little shy. Marcus smiled, setting down a small bag of snacks he'd brought her. "These are Mr. and Mrs. Parker. Remember the boy I told you about, the one I helped, Timothy? These are his parents." Amara's eyes lit up with recognition, and she gave them a small wave. "Hi." Laura stepped forward, her arms filled with a few carefully chosen gifts. A stuffed bear with a bright red bow, a puzzle set, and a children's book about superheroes. "Hi, Amara," she said warmly, kneeling beside the bed. "Your daddy's told us so much about you. We thought you might like these." Amara's face lit up as she reached for the stuffed bear, hugging it close. "Thank you," she said, her smile wide. "You're very welcome," Laura replied, her own smile tinged with emotion. Matthew stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Your dad's a hero, you know. He saved my son, and we're really grateful. We wanted to come meet the girl who makes him so strong." Amara looked up at Marcus, her small fingers still clutching the bear. "I told you you're a hero, Daddy." Marcus chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I can't argue with two smart people saying it now, huh?" They all laughed, the tension in the room dissolving into something warm and comforting. For the next hour, Matthew and Laura stayed, talking to Amara about her favorite things, her love of books, her dream of visiting the park again, and her favorite stories that she made up in her head. Laura listened intently, tears forming in her eyes more than once, while Matthew nodded along, clearly impressed by the little girl's spirit. Before they left, Matthew knelt beside Amara's bed and looked her in the eye. "I want you to promise me something, Amara," he said. She tilted her head. "What's that?" "Promise me you'll keep being as brave as you are now," Matthew said, his voice steady. "Because your dad and I are going to make sure you get through this. You've got a lot of people rooting for you." Amara's smile grew softer, and she reached out to shake his hand, her tiny fingers gripping his firmly. "I promise," she said. Matthew straightened, his expression filled with determination. "Good." As they said their goodbyes and left the room, Marcus walked them to the hallway. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for the job, for everything. It means a lot." Matthew placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We're just getting started. You saved my family, Marcus. Now let us help yours." Marcus nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in months. He could see a path forward, one with hope at the end. Marcus stood in the break room at Parker Global Enterprises, adjusting the crisp navy blue polo shirt embroidered with the company logo. The first day on the job had been a whirlwind: training manuals, safety protocols, meeting his supervisor. But Marcus already felt the difference between this place and the warehouse he used to call work. The air here didn't feel heavy with exhaustion. It felt purposeful. He glanced at the training sheet in his hand, reviewing the notes he'd jotted down earlier. His new manager, a sharp but approachable woman named Cynthia Morales, had walked him through his responsibilities for the day. Though he felt out of his depth initially, Marcus reminded himself why he was here. Amara, the chance to give her the life she deserved, was worth any learning curve. "Hey, Marcus," Cynthia's voice called out as she walked into the break room. She had a stack of papers under one arm and a no-nonsense look on her face, but her tone was friendly. "Ready to shadow me on the floor?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said with a nod, slipping the training sheet into his back pocket. She smirked. "Drop the ma'am. We're not that formal here. Just Cynthia works." "Got it, Cynthia," Marcus said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The day flew by as Marcus followed Cynthia across the bustling operations floor. He observed how shipments were tracked, routes optimized, and teams coordinated. Parker Global wasn't just a warehouse, it was a well-oiled machine, and though the terminology was new and the technology daunting, Marcus paid attention to everything. By the end of the week, Cynthia noticed. "You've got a sharp eye," she told him as they walked through the rows of inventory. "Not a lot of people catch on this quickly. Have you done logistics work before?" "Not unless you count figuring out how to make rent stretch over hospital bills," Marcus said, with a small chuckle. Cynthia stopped and gave him an appraising look. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. We need problem solvers here, and you've got the kind of focus this team could use." Her words lit something inside Marcus, something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride. As Marcus settled into the rhythm of his new job, he found that the hours really were a gift. No more late-night shifts that left him dragging himself to Amara's hospital room half asleep. Instead, he clocked out at 5 p.m. most days, with enough time to pick up flowers or her favorite snack before heading to see her. Amara's treatments were going better than ever, thanks to the specialists Matthew had connected them with. Every week brought a small but significant improvement. Her color was coming back, her energy was returning, and the spark in her eyes that Marcus loved so much was shining brighter. One evening, as Marcus walked into her hospital room with a smoothie in hand, Amara greeted him with a smile that nearly stopped him in his tracks. "Hi, Daddy," she said, sitting up straighter than she had in months. "Well, someone's in a good mood," Marcus teased, setting the smoothie down on her bedside table. "What's got you all excited today?" Amara pointed to the small chart taped to the wall where the nurse tracked her progress. A bold green marker circled today's date with the words, "Discharge soon," written beside it. "They think I can go home soon," Amara said, her voice bubbling with joy. Marcus crouched beside her, his heart swelling. "That's the best news I've heard all week," he said softly. "But where will we go?" Amara asked suddenly, tilting her head. Marcus grinned. "Funny you should ask, Peanut. I've got a surprise for you." Amara's eyes widened. What kind of surprise? "You'll see," Marcus said mysteriously, tapping her nose with his finger. 2 weeks later, Amara finally left the hospital, her discharge papers in hand and a new spring in her step. Marcus drove her across town to the surprise he'd been planning ever since his first paycheck at Parker Global cleared. When they pulled up in front of the modest but well-kept apartment building, Amara's jaw dropped. "This is where we're going?" she asked, her voice brimming with excitement. "This is home," Marcus said, stepping out of the car and opening her door. Amara raced ahead of him as fast as her still-recovering legs would let her, eager to explore. Inside, the apartment wasn't fancy, but it was worlds away from the cramped and crumbling space they'd left behind. The living room had a couch that wasn't held together by duct tape. The kitchen had enough room for both of them to cook together, just like they used to. And most importantly, Amara had her own room, a bright, cheerful space Marcus had decorated with posters of her favorite cartoon characters. "It's all ours?" she whispered, running her fingers along the edge of her new bed. "All ours," Marcus confirmed, leaning in the doorway. Amara turned and threw her arms around him, squeezing tightly. "I love it, Daddy. Thank you." Marcus hugged her back, his eyes stinging. "I should be thanking you, Peanut. You're the reason for all of this." In the weeks that followed, their new life began to take shape. Amara's recovery continued steadily, and Marcus found himself thriving at work. Cynthia pulled him aside one afternoon to tell him how much his suggestions for optimizing the delivery schedules had saved the company in costs, and Matthew himself called Marcus to thank him. "You've got a real knack for this," Matthew said over the phone. "I'm glad I trusted my gut on you." "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied, the pride in his voice unmistakable. At home, Amara seemed happier than ever. She started making lists of all the things she wanted to do now that she felt stronger: trips to the park, movie nights, and eventually going back to school. For Marcus, each day felt like a new beginning. The weight he'd carried for so long was finally easing. The call came early in the morning, just as Marcus was pouring himself a cup of coffee in his new apartment's modest kitchen. His phone vibrated on the counter, the number flashing a local precinct's name. He hesitated for a moment, the mug hovering in his hand. "Hello?" he answered cautiously, his voice low to avoid waking Amara, who was still asleep in her room. "Mr. Hale? This is Officer Green," the familiar voice said. "I wanted to update you on the case involving Timothy Parker's attempted abduction." Marcus set the coffee mug down, his chest tightening. "Yeah? What's going on?" "We've made arrests," Green said firmly. "The two men you described, they've been identified and taken into custody. We've also linked them to a larger human trafficking operation we've been investigating for months. Your actions that day stopped them from taking another victim and gave us critical leads to shut down the ring." Marcus let out a slow breath, relief washing over him. "So, they're not going to hurt anyone else?" "Not on my watch," Green said. "We've got solid evidence, and they'll be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. You did a good thing, Mr. Hale, a brave thing." Marcus nodded, though the weight of it all left him momentarily speechless. "Thanks for letting me know," he finally said. "Any time," Green replied. "If you want to come down to the precinct to talk through anything or see the case files, you're welcome to." Marcus considered it for a moment. "I'll think about it," he said, though deep down he knew he wanted closure. Later that week, Marcus found himself sitting across from Matthew Parker at the precinct. They hadn't spoken much about the kidnappers since that day at Marcus's home, but now the topic was unavoidable. Matthew was scanning a folder Green had handed him, his jaw tightening as he read through the charges against the men. "This is worse than I thought," Matthew murmured, closing the folder and looking at Marcus. "It's not just about Timothy. They've done this before, probably more times than we'll ever know." Marcus nodded. "But at least they're off the streets now." Matthew studied him for a moment, his expression softening. "You know, if you hadn't been there that day, I can't even think about it." He let out a shaky breath. Marcus shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the heavy praise. "You've done more than enough, Matthew. You gave me a chance to change my life, to change Amara's life." Matthew smiled faintly. "We'll call it even then." They stood, shaking hands before parting ways, both feeling a deep sense of resolution as they left the precinct. Amara's full recovery came shortly after. marking a milestone Marcus had dreamed of for so long. The doctor had given the final green light, and Marcus celebrated by throwing her a small party in their new apartment. The living room was decorated with streamers and balloons, the kitchen counter lined with cupcakes that Marcus had done his best to frost himself. Amara, dressed in a bright yellow dress that matched her personality perfectly, stood in the middle of it all, beaming. "Daddy, this is the best party ever," she exclaimed, spinning in a circle. Marcus laughed, watching her with a mix of pride and gratitude. "You deserve it, Peanut. You've been through so much, and now it's time to celebrate how strong you are." Amara stopped spinning and ran to hug him tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You did most of the work," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, as he kissed the top of her head. Just as they were finishing their cupcakes, Marcus received a call from Matthew. "Marcus, we're throwing a party for Timothy's birthday this weekend," Matthew said. "We'd love it if you and Amara could come. It'll be a chance to celebrate her recovery, too, and for our families to spend some time together." Marcus hesitated for a moment, but Amara's excited eyes, as she overheard the invitation, made the decision for him. "We'll be there," he said, smiling down at her. The Parkers' backyard was something out of a magazine. Lush green grass, a sparkling blue pool, and tables piled high with food. Amara's eyes widened as they stepped into the scene, her hand gripping Marcus's tightly. "Daddy, this is amazing," she whispered. "Yeah, it's something," Marcus replied, feeling slightly out of place, but happy to see Amara's excitement. Matthew and Laura greeted them warmly, ushering them toward the other guests. Timothy ran up to Amara immediately, holding a balloon in one hand. "Hi, do you want to play?" he asked. Amara nodded eagerly, and within seconds the two children were running across the yard together, laughing as they chased each other. "They're like old friends already," Laura said, watching them with a smile. "Kids are like that," Marcus said, crossing his arms as he observed Amara's joy. As the evening progressed, the adults gathered around a patio table, talking and laughing. Marcus found himself relaxing more than he had in months, the weight of his worries finally easing. At one point, Matthew raised a glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying over the chatter. "To Marcus Hale, a man who didn't just save my son, he's a reminder of how one act of courage can change lives. My family is forever grateful." The group clinked their glasses, and Marcus, caught off guard, simply nodded, his throat too tight with emotion to speak. Later, as the party wound down and the stars came out, Marcus sat on the edge of the patio, watching Amara and Timothy play by the pool. For the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but tonight was proof of how far they'd come. And for Marcus, that was enough. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, please give this video a like and subscribe for more.